Hey writers, I am Renee Latulip, and this is the Lyrical Language Lab, and today I have another episode of BookLook, where I'll be looking at what exactly are poem picture books. Be right back. Alright, so let's get started. In some of my former videos, I mentioned poem picture books as opposed to story picture books. So I thought that I would share with you exactly what I think a poem picture book is. At least that's what I call a poem picture book, for lack of a better definition. And so I thought I'd share with you a few that I have here in my house, in my own library, and we'll take a quick look at what makes them a poem picture book. As I've mentioned before, a poem picture book, although it may not have the same story elements as a story picture book, it does need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs to engage the reader. It needs to take the reader on some sort of a journey that starts at point A and finishes at point Z. So of course it has things in common with a regular story picture book that has a more developed plot, developed characters, it has problems and resolutions, obstacles to overcome, it has that twist at the end, all elements of a real story picture book. So we do have some things in common. The most important thing, of course, if you're going to do a poem picture book is to find that arc. What is it that's going to carry the reader from that point A to point Z, okay? So I'm going to start actually with the oldest one I have, which is a 1978 by poet Mary Ann Hoberman, a renowned poet. A House is a House for Me. So she begins simply, it's kind of a nonfiction actually. She begins talking about different houses in the world. For example, a hill is a house for an ant. A hive is a house for a bee. A hole is a house for a mole or a mouse. And a house is a house for me. So it begins quite, let's say, normally. All right, we're just talking about different types of houses. We've got a web is a house for a spider, and so on and so forth. But then, as it goes along, and this is actually quite a long, it is over 32 pages, I'm not sure, I didn't count them, but it's more than 32. As we go along, it starts to get a little more exuberant. It starts to get a little far-fetched, a lot imaginative, let's put it that way. And for example, we've got, again, this seems kind of normal. A glove is a house for a hand. A stocking's a house for a knee. A shoe or a boot is a house for a foot, and a house is a house for me. So again, it has that refrain, a house is a house for me, and she's looking at all these interesting things that could be a house. So now a boot is a house for a foot, your stocking is the house for your knee. It's getting a little more imaginative. And then we get into sort of Alice in Wonderland spread here. A box is a house for a tea bag. A teapot's a house for some tea. If you pour me a cup and I drink it all up, then the tea house will turn into me. I love the imagination of this. So now the tea house used to be the teapot, but now because I drank the tea, I'm the tea house. I just think that is so imaginative, so inventive. And then she starts to actually say it to the reader. Cartons are houses for crackers, castles are houses for kings. The more that I think about houses, the more things are houses for things. So now it starts to become kind of a personal brainstorm. What could be considered a house? And then she directly addresses the reader with, and if you get started in thinking, I think you will find it is true, that the more that you think about houses for things, the more things are houses to you. So now she's inviting the reader in. And this is about halfway through the book, right? So she started like normal things, ants and she went through some farm animals earlier in the book. And now she's addressing the reader, saying, what can you think of that could be a house for something? And the illustrations, of course, help. We've got the bag of groceries, a house A pincushion is a house for pins, that kind of thing. And, oh, I love this. I guess this would be a hand is a house for Band-Aids because they have to have somewhere to go, right? And then it just goes on. And she starts to get, out of how pockets are houses for pennies, pens are houses for ink, and it goes on and on and on. But then what happens? So it has this crescendo, right, where it starts to get kind of out of control. And then she brings it back down to being fairly normal again. And she keeps coming back with that refrain, a house is a house for me, that ties everything together. I love this. My head is a house for a secret that I never will tell. I mean, think of that, how invented. And then we end with something that involves everybody, the whole reader, which is a flowers at home in a garden, a donkey's at home in a stall. Each creature that's known has a house of its own. And the earth is a house for us all. And that's how it ends. So she's gone from, these ruminations. Then she's taken us into imagination land, into Alice in Wonderland land. She's invited us in to think about it ourselves, what could possibly be a house. She's given us a whole lot more examples and sort of brought it back down to earth, and then actually ends with the earth itself. So she has definitely taken us on a journey. She's made us think about things in a new way, which is what the purpose of poetry is, or one of the things that poetry, I wouldn't say the purpose, but one of the things that poetry does is to make us look at things in a new light. And so she's definitely done this with so many comparisons of what can be a house. And there's also some nonfiction in here. There are things, an igloo's a house for, up in Alaska. I just lost a page. Regardless, she's taking us on this wonderful journey. So this is a really good example of a very long poem that has been turned into a picture book. Now we have another interesting example called Atlantic by G. Brian Karras. And what I really enjoy about this one is it's nonfiction, once again, and I do find that often some of these books are nonfiction. And it is a personification of the Atlantic Ocean. So the entire thing is the ocean telling the reader all about itself. So it's nonfiction told in the first person by the ocean itself. We would call this a mask poem. But it's a poem. There's no plot. There's no problem. It's not like he has to overcome a big problem and save the world. It just starts with, I am the Atlantic Ocean. And this one doesn't rhyme. It's free verse. I begin where the land runs out at the end of yards and streets and hills. And then it goes on to give us particular information, about currents and Gulf Streams and all that good stuff, where it goes. I stretch from the icy poles north and south. I rub shoulders with North America. I bump into Africa. I slosh around South America and crash into Europe. All those great verbs that he uses in just that small snippet. We've got some more nonfiction going on here. My water doesn't stay in just one place. It travels from continent to continent. So that iceberg floating past someone's window one day will sometime find itself lapping at your toes on a warm sandy beach. Again, interesting that even here, the reader is directly addressed, just as in a house is a house for me. And what a great way to involve a reader. So we've got this arc going, where it's growing. He does grow, again, where he goes, my fingers stretch out, bays and inlets, reach far into the land. So there's even some dramatic stuff here. I'm here day and night, heaving, raging, lying still, scraping away at some land and putting it someplace else. And this drama comes pretty much in the middle of the book. So again, we've got an arc. Sometimes shrinking, never staying still. Talks about the effects of the sun and the moon on the ocean. When he was discovered, how fishermen use him, how artists use him, how poets, I like this one, and poets know me with their beautiful words. Oh. Artists paint pictures of me with cerulean, cobalt, and ultramarine, and poets know me with their beautiful words. So we go from science to the arts in one short book, talking about dolphins and whales, seagulls, and then it ends again involving the reader. Seagulls sing to me. Sand and pebbles rattle and clatter a chorus as I rush in and pull away. My words crash and whisper in your ear. Don't forget, I am here. I am the Atlantic Ocean. So it ends, and look, the kid is actually inside the shell with the ocean. Again, beautiful arc. We have some back matter here. So nonfiction poem. I don't know, I think, is this more than 32 pages as well? No, it's probably a regular picture book. But you can see that the arc happens just in the build of his language in the words. Here's one a little bit older. Well, not that older. I think it's maybe 2006. This is one of my favorite poem picture books that I read to my kids. I Took the Moon for a Walk by Carolyn Curtis with his gorgeous illustrations. I love the paintings of Allison Jay. Really beautiful. And this is more of an arc, and it's a poem once again. And this one is written in couplets. And it basically tells the story, again, a poem story, a narrative poem about a boy in his imagination who took the moon for a walk. The moon has little red shoes, and and what's interesting about this one is that things happen in the illustrations and then they're carried on to the next page. So you see that thing in the next illustration. Like they're all linked. All the illustrations are linked. And so the illustrations tell a second story. We have the words, I took the moon for a walk last night. It followed behind like a still summer kite. And this follows a great progression. This is why it was one of my favorite examples, because he's leaving his house, which is here, all right? And he's going down the road, and we see all the neighbors outside of their houses as well. And as we get a larger view, okay, we see there's those houses that we just saw, and now he's going towards the woods, and his house is over here. So we see what's already happened, and we see what's coming up in the illustrations. Though there wasn't a string or a tail in sight when I took the moon for a walk. They're not couplets, I'm sorry, they're triplets. So if this were written out as a poem, it would be quatrains, and it would be 3 rhyming lines and then 1 unrhymed line, which is when I took the moon for a walk. That's the refrain, and it's repeated over at the end of every stanza. But they are spread out like this. So we have this rhyme scheme: night, kite, sight, when I took the moon for a walk. All right. And it goes on through the trees, through the woods, as we see here. Just to show you real quickly the link, we can see that in this very first picture, we can see that he has a flashlight in his pocket. All right, so he's already prepared for something, but that's like a little tiny detail that carries us through. And then we see when he's in the woods, he takes out his flashlight. And my favorite thing here is that the moon bumps his butt on the top of the church spire, which of course looks like a face, and he loses a shoe, right? And people around all the houses have these little faces. He loses a shoe. I warned the moon to rise a bit higher so it wouldn't get hooked on a church's tall spire. While the neighborhood dogs made a train whistle choir when I took the moon for a walk. And you see here in his hand is the shoe. So he's picked up the shoe, and the moon has just the one shoe on. And that little storyline goes through the whole book, and eventually he gives the moon back his shoe. They swing together, and then they fly beautiful. They fly over the playground. So there's definitely drama and adventure in this, even though, you know, it's a poem. It is just a book-length poem. There's no big plot points going on here. It's just a journey. And it's a really, I highly recommend getting this as a wonderful example. And this is him going back home after their adventure. You see the people outside, they're going home as well, calling their dogs in. And the house is ready to welcome him back. And he goes to sleep, as does the moon. So our last stanza would be, then as we turned back, the moon kept me in sight. It followed me home and stayed there all night, and thanked me by sharing its sweet, sleepy light when I took the moon for a walk. And once again, we have nonfiction back matter. I think that the poem picture books lend themselves really well to nonfiction, at least even if the story itself is not nonfiction, it's totally fiction. Obviously, he's flying around with the moon. It really lends itself, though, this format, to nonfiction back matter. So we have the phases of the moon, facts about the moon, and also the world at night, animals that come out at night. So lots of opportunity there to get some nonfiction in. And of course, we know that teachers love nonfiction. So let me move on to two newer ones. Well, these are all new, actually. Again, nonfiction. I've got two bird things here. Everyday Birds by Amy Ludwig Vanderwater and You Nest Here With Me by Jane Yolen and Heidi Stempel. Everyday Birds, again, a long poem about different kinds of birds. And this is written for really little kids and really bold illustrations and very, very, very short verses that just introduces the bird and moves on. So we have the introductory stanza. Every day we watch for birds weaving through our sky. We listen to their calls and songs. We like to see them fly. And then we go to the birds. And again, if this were written as a poem, it would be quatrains with an ABCB rhyme scheme. So we have chickadee wears a wee black cap. So we have the big name of the bird and one fact about the bird. He has a wee black cap. Jay is loud and bold. Fact. Nuthat perches upside down. Finch is clothed in gold. So you see that we have that ABCB rhyme scheme. And again, if this were just written as a poem, right down the page, quatrains, ABCB. And it's just a delightful way to introduce little kids to all the different kinds of birds that they might see on their daily walk to school. And these wonderful, bold illustrations. And then at the end, Amy began with an introductory stanza, and she ends, she wraps it all up. Every day we watch for birds living right outside our door. We pay attention to the birds. Every day we learn some more. I mean, that is just so charming. And in fact, the entire poem as it's written is included in the back of the book. So that's another wonderful little extra. If someone just wants to read it as a poem, there it is. So that was a great idea on the publisher's part. And of course, nonfiction back matter. More facts about every single bird listed in this book, in this poem. Look at that. So again, this also kind of addresses the reader. Well, it says it includes the reader by saying we, the use of we. So charming, charming, charming. And another bird book, very quickly, You Nest Here With Me. This one has a lovely refrain. And this one also teaches about birds and their homes. So again, this has an introductory stanza where we have, my little nestling, time for bed, climb inside, you sleepy head. Like baby bird, your nest can be anywhere, there's you and me. And this one again has very short lines showing where each Bird nests. Pigeons nest on concrete ledges. Catbirds nest in greening hedges. Tiny wrens in shoreline sledges. You nest here with me. So after every 3 lines, we have the refrain, but you nest here with me. So it's really a lullaby to a child. Okay? Again, no big plot. We've got lots of birds, and we're always coming back to you nest here with me. So it is the reader speaking to his or her own child, but you nest here with me. It is absolutely delightful and calming. It's a great read aloud for bedtime. And guess what we have at the end? All right, so again, we wrap up. So till you're big as big can be, you'll nest right here in our house with me. So, a very reassuring book, I would say. Back matter. What do we have? We have, how they lay eggs, what their eggs look like, what their feathers look like, and, their habitats, and all these wonderful, of course, Jane and Heidi and the Yolen family are big birder people, so they know what they're talking about. And again, poem picture book. Such a great opportunity for nonfiction content. Another one, nonfiction content, Water is Water by Miranda Paul. And this one is really great example if you want to look at progression, because kind of like I took the moon for a walk, one thing leads to another in this. All the things are connected. And in fact, water kind of connects us all. So this is nonfiction, absolutely nonfiction. And very short stanzas. Drip, sip, pour me a cup. Water is water, unless, and she has this repetition, this kind of refrain, I guess. I'm going to call it more of a repetition than a refrain because it's just the one word. Unless it heats up, right? So we've got a connection already. Water is water unless it heats up. Whirl, swirl, watch it curl by. Steam is steam. Unless, you see how that takes you to the next page? So there's definitely an arc going on here, because what we're following is the different forms that water can take, and they're all connected. It's kind of genius, this one, I have to say. I really, really love this example of a poem picture book. Unless it cools high, and then we see what happens in the sky, right? A dragon and a wagon, a crow eating dough. Clouds are clouds, unless, of course it's going to carry you to the next page. They form low, and then you get fog. So, wonderful teaching book. The arc, as I mentioned, is that it takes us through all the forms of water. And, we've got our ice, and we see the kids playing on the ice. And, besides taking us through the forms of water, it takes us through the seasons. So it's tied together also through the seasons. There's so much going on in what appears at first look to be a simple poem, because again, not a lot of words, but every word counts in this. Every word shows us something new, teaches us something about water, and at the end, it goes back to the beginning, really, where at the beginning they were sipping a cup of water, and water is water. And it comes full circle to drinking up the water, which actually now has become cider. And of course, jumping in the water. So much going on here between seasons and the forms of the water. And of course, what is it? Nonfiction back matter, all about water. I'm telling you, this is, and of course, a bibliography for further reading. Poem picture books are such a wonderful, I'm going to call it a genre. I don't know if it's a genre or if it can be considered its own separate thing, but there are just so many beautiful ones, and it's one of my preferred types of picture book, honestly, because I get poetry, for one, which of course I love, but I also get a journey. I get taken someplace, and I learn stuff. So The last one I'm going to share is this absolutely gorgeous piece of work. Look, first of all, look at this cover. I think this is one of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen. I adore this color, first of all. This is Gwendolyn Brooks, and it is called A Song for Gwendolyn Brooks by Alice Faye Duncan, a wonderful writer and a wonderful poet and a wonderful teacher. So what Alice did here is write a picture book biography of Gwendolyn Brooks using her own, basically she created her own song for Gwendolyn Brooks, hence the title. And she features in this book poems by Gwendolyn Brooks that are paired then by poems by Alice Faye herself. And it is in the poems by Alice Faye that we get the story of Gwendolyn Brooks. All right. So and again, we have a repetition going on here. You might call this more a collection of poems, but I think it's more of a poem picture book because they're all linked. You know, Alice Faye's poems are all linked because they're telling us the story from, you know, her childhood up through becoming, you know, the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize. And, you know, I think it was 1950, and her childhood as a kind of an insecure, unsure about herself, kind of, you know, a little girl who's just not sure where she fits in. And I'm going to share just this one poem here. We start with Alice Faye's work here, her poem, and it's free verse, okay? Sing a song for Gwendolyn Brooks. Sing it loud, a Chicago blues. Skip to the beat of elevated trains. They grumble, rumble, and roll real fast. And we see Gwendolyn here. The year is 1925. Gwendolyn Brooks is 8 years old. Gray bursts of smoke hide the yellow sun. Can flowers grow without sunlight? Gwendolyn leans on the front yard gate. Gwendolyn is unsure. So we start right off with the picture book biography, the beginnings, starting in her childhood, of course. And if you notice, the poem started with Sing a Song for Gwendolyn Brooks, and all of Alice Faye's poems in this begin with that line. So she's got her refrain that comes at the beginning of every poem. And then what you see on all the other spreads is a poem, one of Gwendolyn Brooks's own poems. All right, this one is called The Busy Clock, and about telling the time and how busy our lives are. And then we have Alice Faye's response to that. Sing a song for Gwendolyn Brooks. She greets each day in her velvet glory. Her head is filled with snappy rhymes. She writes her poems in dime store journals. Gwendolyn stands outside the fray. Her classmates cuss. They swish and sass. They joke and jive. They laugh real loud. They boast and bully. They signify. Girls jump rope on cracked sidewalks. Boys play baseball in the streets. Poets own a watchful eye. Gwendolyn stands alone. I love this portrayal of Gwendolyn as a young girl. I love Alice Faye's free verse here. The action as she's describing all the other kids in the class, and then her more gentle description of the very thoughtful Gwendolyn Brooks. And it goes through her childhood, her school days, her growth as a writer. So we get the entire story of Gwendolyn Brooks told in poems that are connected. So I'm going to go ahead and call this a poem picture book rather than a collection of poems. I think it's both, actually. And I love that it includes Gwendolyn's own poems as well. Absolutely beautiful illustrations, just kind of to die for. I just love the color palette of this book. It is just, it feels minimalist and full and gorgeous. So let's see if we have some back matter in here as well. I'm sure that we do. We do. We have a nice lengthy author's note. And we have the Gwendolyn Brooks timeline, which, you know, for a picture book biography, kind of a must-have. And then, of course, a bibliography and suggested reading. So, as you can see, we've gone from some fictional stuff with like The Moon Takes a Walk. We've gone through a personified poem that tells us all about the Atlantic Ocean. We've learned about birds. We've had a lot of fun learning about houses. We've got science with Water is Water. And we have a picture book biography with Gwendolyn Brooks. So this type of picture book, the poem picture book, just offers so many opportunities. So lots of good ideas here. Remember, arc is important, and I think you'll see if you study these books, you'll find that they really do take us on a journey, and that's what we're looking for. Thanks for joining me on BookLook, and if you're not familiar with the poem picture book format, I urge you to go to the library, seek them out, study them, find some mentor texts, and take a look at your own list of picture book ideas and see if one of them just might lend itself to a poem picture book. Happy reading!